Sometimes, it takes just one cruel sentence to shatter years of silence. One dinner, one insult, one moment that forces a mother to stop living in the shadows of sacrifice and finally take back her life. This is the story of Elizabeth, a woman who gave everything to her son, only to discover that sometimes the bravest act of love is learning to say no. Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the lace tablecloth. The smell of roasted chicken, seasoned just the way her late husband loved it, filled the air. She glanced at the clock. It was almost 6. Mark and Chloe would arrive any minute now. Her heart beat with nervous excitement. She had spent the entire day preparing this dinner, hoping, maybe foolishly, that it might bring them closer. Elizabeth had always been the glue in her family, the quiet giver, the one who held everything together. At 68, she was still cooking, cleaning, and sacrificing, all for her son. The doorbell rang. Elizabeth opened the door to see Chloe stepping in first, her high heels clicking against the tiled floor. Chloe's eyes darted around the modest home, and almost immediately, her lips curled into a faint, dismissive smile. "This house is cozy," Chloe said, the word cozy carrying the sting of a blade. Elizabeth swallowed the hurt, smiled politely, and welcomed them in. Mark followed behind, giving his mother a quick hug, the kind that carried affection but also guilt, though Elizabeth didn't know it yet. They sat at the table. The meal looked beautiful. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, and Elizabeth's famous apple pie cooling on the counter. She poured them wine, her hands steady now. But the tension was there, humming beneath every word. Chloe picked at the chicken, then raised an eyebrow. "It's nice. Not quite like my mother's cooking, of course, but nice." Elizabeth's heart sank a little, but she kept her smile. She had grown used to Chloe's sharp tongue. For the sake of her son, she stayed quiet. Mark said nothing. He never did. He avoided conflict, always letting the two women circle each other like cats in the dark. The dinner dragged on, heavy with unspoken words. Elizabeth tried to ask about their lives, about Mark's work, about Chloe's hobbies. The answers were short, clipped, or turned into subtle critiques of Elizabeth's old-fashioned ways. And then came dessert. Elizabeth placed the apple pie on the table with quiet pride. She had baked it since Mark was a boy, his favorite. But as she set down the plates, Chloe leaned back in her chair, her voice cold and cutting. "You know, Elizabeth," she said, "you're not half the woman my mother is." The words hung in the air like poison. Mark froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Elizabeth felt the sting in her chest, sharp and unbearable. For a moment, it seemed she might cry, might crumble as she always had, letting the insult pass in silence. But something inside her snapped. Elizabeth slowly placed her napkin on the table, pushed her chair back, and looked Chloe squarely in the eye. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "Then," she said softly, "she can start paying your rent." The room went silent. Mark's eyes widened in shock. Chloe blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Chloe asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Elizabeth leaned forward, her hands steady on the table. "The $1,800 you pay every month for that apartment? It doesn't come from Mark's paycheck. It comes from me." The words hit like a hammer. Chloe's face twisted in disbelief. She turned to Mark. "Is she joking?" Mark's mouth opened, but no words came. His silence was louder than any confession. Elizabeth continued, her voice steady but filled with years of buried pain. "For months, I've been draining what little I have left, selling your father's wedding ring, skipping my medication, working extra hours on my sewing to keep you two afloat. And while I've been sacrificing, you've been dining out, buying new clothes, going on vacations." Tears pricked her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "This ends tonight." Chloe's face turned pale. "Mark, is this true?" Mark finally spoke, his voice breaking. I lost my job weeks ago. I didn't tell you. I thought I'd find something else before you noticed." Mom offered to help, and his words trailed off. Chloe pushed back her chair. "The third job in 2 years, Mark?" "The third?" And you let your mother, carry this? Mark buried his face in his hands. The facade had crumbled. The lies, the secrets, the shame, all of it lay bare on the table. Elizabeth stood slowly, her voice resolute. No more. I will not be your safety net any longer. You have 30 days before the lease ends. After that, you're on your own. My days of sacrificing my health, my happiness, my life for your lies are over. For the first time in years, Elizabeth felt her back straighten, her voice strong. She wasn't just Mark's mother anymore. She was a woman reclaiming her worth. The dinner ended not with laughter or warmth, but with silence, the kind that signals an ending and maybe, just maybe, a new beginning. The house was quiet the next morning, but inside Elizabeth's heart, something had changed. The chains of silence had broken. For the first time in years, she had stood up for herself, and the silence that followed was not weakness, but freedom. Mark and Chloe left her home in tension that night. Their marriage, once built on appearances and shallow comforts, now cracked under the weight of truth. Chloe packed her things weeks later, unable to accept the fall from luxury. She left without looking back. Elizabeth felt sorrow, yes, but beneath it was relief, like opening a window in a stuffy room and breathing fresh air for the first time. Weeks later, as Elizabeth sat by the window sewing, the phone rang. She answered, and a familiar voice spoke her name. Elizabeth? It's Arthur. Her breath caught. Arthur, her college sweetheart, the man she once loved, but lost when life pulled them in different directions. He had built a life in Seattle, moved to America decades ago, and yet here he was on the other end of the line. They spoke for hours that night, about the past, about their lives, about the dreams they had once shared. Arthur had lost his wife years ago, but he had never forgotten Elizabeth. I'd love for you to visit, he said softly. Come to Seattle. Let me show you a different kind of life. For the first time in years, Elizabeth felt a spark, a reminder that she was not just a mother, not just a widow, but a woman with her own story yet to be written. Meanwhile, Mark's world had collapsed. Without Chloe to shield him, and without his mother's financial support, he was forced to face the truth. He began therapy, something he once mocked. In the quiet of those sessions, he confessed his greatest shame, that he was addicted to being rescued, that every mistake, every failure was cushioned by his mother's sacrifice. It was time to stop. Mark took a modest job at a local hardware store. The pay was small, but it was honest. He rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment, nothing like the life he once flaunted, but it was his. One afternoon, he visited Elizabeth. He didn't come to beg, or to lie, or to hide. He came with open hands. Mom, he said quietly, I don't want to drag you down anymore. You've given me everything, and I kept taking. But you deserve more than this life of sacrifice. Go to Seattle. Be happy. Don't stay because of me. For the first time, Elizabeth saw her son not as the helpless boy she had always protected, but as a man, flawed, struggling, but finally standing on his own feet. A week later, Elizabeth boarded a plane to Seattle. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with hope. In her hands, she carried a letter Mark had written. On the plane, she unfolded the paper and read, Mom, thank you for finally loving me enough to let me grow up. Thank you for every sacrifice, every night you stayed awake worrying about me. I am who I am because of you. Now it's time for you to fly high. Don't look back. Be happy. Tears blurred her vision. For the first time, her son's words gave her permission to live. Not for him, not for duty, but for herself. Seattle was alive with possibility. Arthur greeted her at the airport with flowers, and in his smile, she saw the boy she once knew and the man he had become. He took her to the harbor, to quiet cafes, to art galleries. He listened, really listened, to her stories, her thoughts, her laughter. He didn't see her as someone to rescue or someone to lean on. He saw her as Elizabeth. One evening, as the sun set over the water, Arthur took her hand. Stay, he whispered. Not as a guest, but as my partner. We've both lived long lives of loss. Let's live the rest in joy. Elizabeth's heart raced. It felt selfish to think of leaving permanently. Could she really start again at her age? She called Mark that night. I don't know if I can leave you behind, she admitted, her voice trembling. But Mark's voice was steady. Mom, you're not leaving me. You're showing me what strength looks like. You gave me freedom when you stopped rescuing me. Now I'm asking you, please take yours. In that moment, Elizabeth knew. She wasn't abandoning her son. She was teaching him the most powerful lesson of all. That love doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finding the courage to grow. Months later, Elizabeth stood in her home, packing her belongings. Mark was there, helping her wrap dishes, carefully folding blankets. He was no longer the man who needed rescuing. He was independent, steady, even hopeful. He had been promoted at work, moved into a modest but comfortable apartment, and was learning to build a life on his own terms. Elizabeth smiled through her tears. I'm proud of you, she whispered. And I'm proud of you, Mark replied. Weeks later, on a quiet beach in Seattle, Elizabeth married Arthur. The ceremony was small, just a few friends, the ocean, and Mark as her witness. For the first time in decades, Elizabeth felt not like a widow, not just a mother, but a woman alive with possibility. And so, what began as a cruel insult at a dinner table became the turning point of a lifetime. Elizabeth discovered that it is never too late to demand respect, to set boundaries, to chase happiness. By choosing herself, she gave her son the greatest gift of all, the chance to grow into his own man. And as she walked hand in hand with Arthur, the sun setting on the horizon, one truth echoed in her heart. It is never too late to begin again.